Eduardo walked slowly through the hall of his mansion, lit by crystal chandeliers that reflected the grandeur of his wealth. Around him, dozens of guests laughed loudly, displaying sparkling jewelry and glasses of French champagne. The vibrant music filled the space, but in his heart, there was only silence. The billionaire observed everything like a distant spectator. Despite appearances, he felt like a stranger in his own world. The conversations were always the same: multi-million-dollar business deals, trips to exclusive islands, and gossip about who would inherit the largest fortunes. Eduardo smiled mechanically, hiding his indifference. None of those dialogues seemed genuine. No words carried affection or sincerity. He noticed that everyone approached him out of self-interest, never out of friendship or care. With every toast, he felt even more isolated. In recent weeks, the pressure had been building. His friends pushed for risky investments, his family demanded that he keep up appearances, and even his love interest, Vanessa, seemed more concerned with the glitter of store windows than with his feelings. Eduardo was starting to feel suffocated. It was as if his life were an endless play in which he was acting the part of a happy man. Deep down, however, he felt empty. Sitting in his library that night, he stared at the shelves of books he rarely read. The pages seemed to call to him, urging him to seek stories more authentic than the charade he was living. The silence comforted him more than the fake applause of the elite. For the first time in years, he began to ask himself, who really cares about me? The answer seemed obvious: no one. Yet a gentle memory crossed his mind, the image of Sofia, his humble cleaning lady, who greeted him with a sincere smile every day, even though she received nothing in return beyond her modest salary. She seemed different from the others, someone who didn't see him merely as a sum of money. Eduardo felt a tightening in his chest. Perhaps there was hope of finding something real. But how could he distinguish the genuine from the fake in a world full of masks? That question tormented him. He knew he couldn't keep living surrounded by illusions. He needed proof, something concrete that would separate true affection from self-interest. For the first time, he felt willing to take a risk. He couldn't stand being just a walking checkbook to those around him anymore. While the guests continued celebrating in the main hall, Eduardo isolated himself in his room. He sat at his desk and began sketching out ideas in a notebook. His eyes shone with a newfound determination. He wanted something radical, something that would test the hearts of those around him. The idea, though cruel, was born there and then, out of exhaustion and loneliness. It would take courage. He knew he might lose important people. He might even be hated for manipulating emotions. But Eduardo also understood that without taking this risk, he would never know the truth. It was time to confront the ghosts surrounding him and face the selfishness of the elite head-on. There was no turning back now.
Have you ever felt surrounded by fake people like Eduardo did? Subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss an inspiring story like this one.
With his mind racing, he imagined how Vanessa would react if she were deprived of luxury. Would she stand by him, or would she abandon him at the first sign of difficulty? He also thought about Sofia and what it would be like to see her face an unexpected opportunity. A faint smile formed on his lips. He had made up his mind. He would carry out the biggest test of his life. That night, alone in his mansion filled with riches, Eduardo finally found a purpose. This wouldn't just be a game of appearances. It would be a revelation, a turning point. He was about to find out who among everyone could see the man behind the fortune, and not just the billionaire. The next morning, Eduardo woke up with his determination clear in his mind. He walked to his bedroom window and watched the city wake under the first rays of sunlight. The buildings shone with a golden glow, but to him, that shine no longer held any meaning. What mattered now was putting his bold plan into motion. His heart was racing. Sitting back at his desk, he began thinking through the details. Choosing the right people was crucial. He needed someone who represented self-interest and someone who represented humility. Vanessa, his love interest, was the perfect candidate for the first role. Sofia, the unassuming cleaning lady, would be the second. The contrast between the two would be undeniable. Eduardo believed the outcome would be revealing. The billionaire called his bank manager and requested 2 black cards, both with no spending limit. His voice was firm, but carried a mix of anxiety and unease. The manager, used to the eccentricities of the wealthy, didn't question it. Within a few hours, the cards would be ready. Eduardo knew that each one held the power to change lives or reveal hidden truths. As he waited, he thought about how he would deliver the cards. For Vanessa, it would be simple. He'd tell her he wanted to make her happy and let her spend freely. But with Sofia, though, he had to be careful. What reason would he give? Maybe a bonus for years of dedicated service, or a gesture of trust? Eduardo didn't want her to suspect it was a test. He wanted to see her pure, unfiltered reaction. The weight of his decision began to sink in. Was it unfair to manipulate people's feelings? Sofia, especially, might feel used if she ever found out the truth. But Eduardo believed there was no other way. The price of truth, however high, was still lower than living a lie. He needed to know who would truly stand by him if everything fell apart. Early that afternoon, the bank manager arrived at the mansion in person and handed him the cards in an elegant envelope. He held them as though they were keys to his future. His heart pounded as he imagined the days ahead. It felt like he was about to open a door that could never be closed again.
First, he sought out Vanessa. During a meeting at the most luxurious mall in the city, he handed her the card. Her eyes sparkled like diamonds when she heard she could spend without limits. Vanessa hugged him excitedly, but Eduardo could tell her excitement was more about the promise of shopping than any real affection. His heart sank a little, but he hid it. Later that day, he met Sofia in a quiet corner of the mansion. He gave her the second card, telling her it was a gift for her quiet dedication. The cleaning lady was stunned, hardly believing what she was seeing. Her hands trembled and her eyes filled with emotion. She could barely speak, but thanked him with a shy smile, promising to use it wisely. Watching her walk away, Eduardo felt something different. With Vanessa, he'd felt doubt and suspicion. With Sofia, he felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if, for a moment, he had done the right thing. Still, the real test was just beginning. The next few days would reveal more than he expected. That night, lying in bed, Eduardo realized his heart wasn't just beating with curiosity about the experiment. Something deeper was stirring inside him. A feeling told him his life was about to change forever, and that the answer about who truly cared wouldn't be long in coming. The day after receiving the card, Vanessa was already at the city's most upscale mall. The store windows glittered like living jewels, reflecting the eager look in her eyes as she scanned every item. Her hands moved greedily over designer handbags, diamond-encrusted necklaces, and dresses that cost small fortunes. The black card shimmered in her hand like a passport to a world without limits. With a confident smile, she handed the card to the clerks, who treated her like royalty. With every approved purchase, she felt more powerful, more desired. The sparkle of the gems seemed to light up not just her appearance, but her vanity too. Vanessa believed that with every swipe, she was getting closer to becoming Eduardo's wife. She strutted through the mall as if she owned everything. Sports cars were bought without a second thought. Exclusive dresses were ordered by the dozen, and rare perfumes filled oversized shopping bags. Her life now felt like a golden fairy tale, fueled by the fortune of a man she believed was falling deeper under her spell. At night, she posted photos on social media showing off her new treasures. Her followers praised, envied, and commented, feeding her sense of triumph. To Vanessa, every like was proof that she was gaining not just wealth, but status and admiration. She was at the peak of her self-confidence. Eduardo watched from a distance. His assistants updated him on every transaction, every extravagant purchase. He saw Vanessa's glow growing brighter, but he also felt his hope fading. The contrast between what he'd wanted and what he was getting was hard to ignore. With every notification, his heart grew heavier.
Still, Vanessa didn't seem to notice Eduardo's emotional distance. To her, the unlimited card was a symbol of absolute love. The more she spent, the more convinced she became that she was winning his heart. In her mind, luxury was proof of power, and she was certain she had both.
At a dinner later that week, Vanessa showed up wearing a silk dress worth thousands of dollars. Her friends, who were just as opportunistic, applauded her taste. Eduardo, however, watched her in silence, as if he were looking at a distorted reflection of everything he disliked. As toasts were made, Vanessa talked about her latest acquisitions, new jewelry, and trips she'd already planned. Her voice was loud, her laugh was sharp but empty. Eduardo, leaning back in his chair, could no longer hide his discomfort. What had once been a suspicion was now a painful certainty. Deep down, Eduardo knew her mask would eventually slip. He just had to find the right moment to reveal the truth. Vanessa believed she was winning, but every step she took toward luxury was actually bringing her closer to a revelation that would change everything. That night, Eduardo returned home more convinced than ever. Vanessa didn't love him. She only loved the feeling of power his money gave her. The game was still unfolding, but the outcome was already taking shape in his mind. While Vanessa paraded through luxury stores, Sofia had a different destination in mind. With the card in hand, she walked to a small animal shelter located in a forgotten part of the city. The place was humble, with peeling walls and the strong smell of medicine. But it was home to dozens of dogs and cats waiting for a family. There, she felt her heart beat differently. The shelter's owner, an elderly man with tired eyes, greeted her with surprise. "What brings you here?" he asked curiously. She explained that she wanted to help and offered the card to pay for urgent surgeries and treatments. The man could hardly believe it, and his eyes welled up with gratitude. For the first time in years, there was hope for saving all those animals. Without any fanfare, Sofia authorized the purchase of medicine, food, and necessary equipment. She only asked that her name not be mentioned. "I don't want recognition, I just want these animals to have a better life," she said humbly. To her, every life saved was worth more than any sparkling jewel. In the days that followed, veterinarians were hired, surgeries were scheduled, and the animals began to recover. Sofia visited the shelter quietly, offering kind words and even helping with cleaning. To the animals, she was a silent angel. To the old man, she was a miracle that had appeared out of nowhere. All the while, she continued her cleaning routine at Eduardo's mansion as if nothing had changed. She never used the card for herself, only for the animals and improvements to the shelter. Eduardo watched from afar without her knowledge, and every gesture of hers moved him more deeply. One afternoon, he saw her leaving the shelter with her clothes covered in animal hair and medicine stains, but with a radiant smile on her face. It was different from Vanessa's, whose shine came from stones and metals.
At a dinner later that week, Vanessa showed up wearing a silk dress worth thousands of dollars. Her friends, who were just as opportunistic, applauded her taste. Eduardo, however, watched her in silence, as if he were looking at a distorted reflection of everything he disliked. As toasts were made, Vanessa talked about her latest acquisitions, new jewelry and trips she'd already planned. Her voice was loud, her laugh was sharp but empty. Eduardo, leaning back in his chair, could no longer hide his discomfort. What had once been a suspicion was now a painful certainty. Deep down, Eduardo knew her mask would eventually slip. He just had to find the right moment to reveal the truth. Vanessa believed she was winning, but every step she took toward luxury was actually bringing her closer to a revelation that would change everything. That night, Eduardo returned home more convinced than ever. Vanessa didn't love him. She only loved the feeling of power his money gave her. The game was still unfolding, but the outcome was already taking shape in his mind. While Vanessa paraded through luxury stores, Sofia had a different destination in mind. With the card in hand, she walked to a small animal shelter located in a forgotten part of the city. The place was humble, with peeling walls and the strong smell of medicine, but it was home to dozens of dogs and cats waiting for a family. There, she felt her heart beat differently. The shelter's owner, an elderly man with tired eyes, greeted her with surprise. "What brings you here?" he asked curiously. She explained that she wanted to help and offered the card to pay for urgent surgeries and treatments. The man could hardly believe it, and his eyes welled up with gratitude. For the first time in years, there was hope for saving all those animals. Without any fanfare, Sofia authorized the purchase of medicine, food, and necessary equipment. She only asked that her name not be mentioned. "I don't want recognition. I just want these animals to have a better life," she said humbly. To her, every life saved was worth more than any sparkling jewel. In the days that followed, veterinarians were hired, surgeries were scheduled, and the animals began to recover. Sofia visited the shelter quietly, offering kind words and even helping with cleaning. To the animals, she was a silent angel. To the old man, she was a miracle that had appeared out of nowhere. All the while, she continued her cleaning routine at Eduardo's mansion as if nothing had changed. She never used the card for herself, only for the animals and improvements to the shelter. Eduardo watched from afar without her knowledge, and every gesture of hers moved him more deeply. One afternoon, he saw her leaving the shelter with her clothes covered in animal hair and medicine stains, but with a radiant smile on her face. It was different from Vanessa, whose shine came from stones and metals.
Sofia's glow came from within. That image stayed in his mind like a portrait of genuine kindness. Even though he was moved, Eduardo felt a growing sense of guilt. Was he using Sofia in an unfair game? She had no idea that her every move was being watched and judged. The billionaire began questioning whether he had any right to test someone so pure. Still, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. One card revealed greed, the other revealed compassion. It was impossible not to compare them. Eduardo felt he was on the verge of confirming what he'd always searched for, the truth about human character. That night, alone in his library, he reread the notes for his plan. The contrast between Vanessa and Sofia was already clear, but the final reveal needed a bigger stage. His heart raced at the idea of a public unmasking, something that would put an end to all doubt once and for all. Sofia, however, remained unaware of what was coming. To her, what mattered were the bright eyes of a healed dog, the soft meow of a rescued cat. Her world was simple, yet full of meaning, and maybe that was exactly what Eduardo needed most in his life. Eduardo watched both women like a spectator at a silent play. Daily bank statements arrived detailing Vanessa's million-dollar purchases and Sofia's modest yet meaningful expenses. The numbers told two different stories, revealing two distant worlds. The billionaire spent hours reflecting on how simple choices could reveal someone's true character. He remembered Vanessa's excited expression as she showed off her new sports cars, contrasted with Sofia's quiet smile as she cared for sick animals. To Eduardo, the comparison grew more painful by the day. It was like seeing two different reflections of humanity, one driven by ego, the other by empathy. His eyes, once cold, began to soften at the sight of Sofia's quiet goodness. But his conscience bothered him. Was he just being a cruel manipulator, turning people's lives into pieces of a game? The doubt grew stronger each day, especially when he saw Sofia sacrificing herself for causes no one else noticed. Her purity stood in contrast to the weight of his own deception. He felt torn between his need for the truth and his fear of hurting someone who didn't deserve it. One afternoon, Eduardo hid outside the shelter just to watch Sofia in action. He saw her help a pregnant dog, gently comforting her as if nothing else in the world existed. There were no cameras, no witnesses, just her true nature shining through. Eduardo felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Meanwhile, Vanessa was throwing a party with her friends, showing off her latest jewelry. She laughed loudly, surrounded by champagne and people flattering her as if she'd conquered the world. But Eduardo saw no triumph in it. To him, it was just emptiness wrapped in gold. And more, that realization filled him with disdain for such superficiality.
Back in his mansion, he locked himself in his study, lost in thought. He picked up the notebook where he'd written his plan and began sketching out new ideas. The contrast was already clear, but he wanted something definitive, something that would leave no room for doubt. He needed a public reveal, something that would unmask everyone in front of the whole world. But the risk tormented him. If he revealed the truth, Sofia might feel used and never trust him again. Losing her purity would be like losing his last shred of hope. Still, Eduardo knew staying silent would be cowardly. He was trapped between his need to act and his fear of destroying everything. Over the next few nights, his sleep was filled with strange dreams. In some, he saw Vanessa abandoning him in front of a crowd. In others, he saw Sofia reaching out to him, only to disappear moments later. He'd wake up sweating, his heart racing. He knew he was approaching a point of no return. During a dinner with Vanessa, he tried steering the conversation toward values, the meaning of life. But she was distracted, talking only about her next shopping spree. Eduardo sighed, resigned. There was no room for illusions anymore. He had to take the next step in his plan. That night, standing by the window overlooking the glowing city, Eduardo made his final decision. He would organize a grand gala dinner, inviting everyone from the elite circle. There, in front of everyone, he would announce his supposed bankruptcy, and then everyone's true colors would show. Despite his determination, Eduardo felt a growing unease. As the invitations went out, his conscience weighed on him, reminding him that he was manipulating people's lives. The contrast between Vanessa and Sofia was already obvious, but he still felt the need to expose everything publicly, as if he needed witnesses to confirm what he already knew. In the days leading up to the event, he watched Vanessa sink deeper into luxury. She showed off her new jewelry at parties, ignoring any topic that wasn't about wealth. Her vanity seemed limitless, and Eduardo only saw what he already expected. Still, he couldn't shake a bitter feeling of disappointment. On the other hand, Sofia stayed true to her simplicity. Even with unlimited resources, she kept going to the shelter, helping the animals, treating them gently, and quietly donating whatever was left to humble causes. She never bought anything for herself. Eduardo wondered how someone could be so selfless in a world driven by greed. The billionaire began spending more time alone, reflecting on his own life. He realized this wasn't just a test for the two women, it was also a test for himself. How far was he willing to go, manipulating and lying in the name of truth? The line between justice and cruelty was growing thinner.
During long walks through his mansion, Eduardo thought back to his childhood, before he inherited his fortune. He remembered small acts of kindness from simple, genuine people, so different from the coldness of the elite. Maybe that's what he was really searching for, the authenticity he'd lost, the humanity hidden beneath all the gold.
One evening, as he found Sofia quietly cleaning one of the mansion's hallways, Eduardo almost told her everything. He wanted to confess that the card was part of a test, that he'd been watching her every move. But he held back, afraid of shattering the purity of her kindness. He simply thanked her, his eyes full of emotion, leaving her confused. Meanwhile, Vanessa was getting ready for the dinner, eager for another chance to show off. She saw the event as her moment to shine, a night where she could stand out next to the richest man in the room. Little did she know, it would be the stage for her own downfall. Alone in his room, Eduardo rehearsed the speech he was going to give. He imagined the shocked expressions, the immediate reactions. His heart swung between anxiety and fear. The risk was huge, but his need to uncover the truth was even greater. Looking in the mirror, he saw his own reflection. Not the powerful billionaire, but an uncertain man searching for something no amount of money could buy. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he wasn't just trying to expose lies. He was looking for love, something real, something pure. And so, with a divided heart, Eduardo sealed the fate of the night ahead. The gala dinner wouldn't just be another social event. It would be the stage for a revelation that would change his life forever.
The invitations were sent out with the usual pomp and elegance the elite expected. Each gold-embossed envelope carried Eduardo's family crest, along with a tasteful message announcing an unforgettable evening. The guests, eager for another chance to show off their designer outfits, immediately RSVP'd. Excitement spread across the city. Eduardo oversaw everything with apparent calm, but inside, his heart was at war. Every detail of the event was carefully planned. The elegantly lit ballroom, the refined music, the imported wines. Nothing hinted that the night would be a stage for revelations. It was the perfect disguise. Everyone expected extravagance, not truth. Vanessa was thrilled. She chose the most expensive dress from her newly acquired collection, one that sparkled like stars. She spent hours at the salon, certain she'd be the most dazzling woman at the party. To her, this dinner would publicly confirm her place at Eduardo's side, soon to be his wife and the owner of his entire fortune. Sofia, on the other hand, was surprised when she received the invitation. Used to being invisible, she never expected to be included among high society names. Eduardo handed it to her personally, saying it was a gesture of appreciation for her dedication. Though hesitant, she accepted, unaware of his true intentions. As the date drew closer, Eduardo rehearsed his speech over and over in front of the mirror. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here tonight to announce," he repeated, trying to find the right tone, somewhere between firm and vulnerable. Each practice ended with him taking a deep breath, wondering if he'd really have the courage to go through with it.
The days leading up to the dinner were filled with tension. Vanessa flooded social media with posts about her preparations, showcasing jewelry, makeup, and her excitement for the evening. Sofia, on the other hand, kept to herself. She bought a simple yet elegant dress, worried she might stand out among the wealthy guests, but determined to honor the invitation with humility. Deep down, Eduardo watched them both. In Vanessa, he saw the artificial glamour he'd come to dislike.
In Sofia, he saw the simplicity he admired more each day. The contrast grew stronger in his mind, reinforcing his belief that the night would reveal everything. Final preparations included everything from imported flower arrangements to dramatic lighting in the ballroom. Everything looked flawless, just as the elite expected. But behind the scenes, Eduardo carried the weight of the truth that was about to come out. The night wouldn't be remembered for its extravagance, but for the revelation no one saw coming. The night before, he stayed awake for hours, staring out his mansion window at the glowing city below. He thought about Sofia and how she might react once she learned she'd been part of an experiment. The fear of losing her felt real, but his need for the truth felt even stronger. So when the day finally arrived, Eduardo was ready. He put on his perfectly tailored suit, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath. He wasn't just going to be the host tonight. He was going to be the man who exposed an entire world, starting with the woman who claimed to love him. The ballroom was packed, glowing under crystal chandeliers that reflected off champagne glasses and shimmering gowns. The city's elite mingled around the tables, chatting about business and gossip, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. The orchestra played softly, adding to the grandeur of the atmosphere. Eduardo watched every face, preparing himself for what came next. Vanessa stood beside him, radiant, showing off her jewelry like trophies. She smiled at everyone, offering calculated kisses and rehearsed gestures. With every camera flash, she seemed more convinced that she was the star of the night. Little did she know, her facade was about to crumble. Sofia, meanwhile, moved through the room timidly. Her simple dress stood in quiet contrast to the glitter around her. Yet her presence carried something undeniable: authenticity. Eduardo watched her from across the room, his heart tightening. She had no idea she was at the center of what was about to happen. Once everyone was seated, Eduardo stood. A respectful silence fell over the room. Everyone expected another routine thank you speech. But instead, his steady voice announced something completely unexpected. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight isn't about celebration. It's about truth. I've come to tell you I've lost everything. I'm bankrupt.
The impact was instant. Whispers spread like wildfire. Disbelieving glances were exchanged across the room. Some laughed nervously, others frowned, unable to process what they just heard. The idea that the young billionaire could have fallen into ruin seemed absurd. But Eduardo stood firm, looking each of them in the eye with unwavering seriousness.
Vanessa was the first to react. Her smile froze, then quickly turned to outrage. "What do you mean, bankrupt? Is this some kind of joke?" she said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Eduardo simply shook his head, confirming it wasn't. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Slowly, the guests began to step back. Some whispered criticisms under their breath, while others quietly made their way toward the exit. The festive mood vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of judgment and disdain. Unable to bear the thought of losing her status, Vanessa stood up in anger. "I'm not wasting my time on a failure," she shouted, pulling off the ring she was wearing and throwing it onto the table. The gesture echoed through the hall, followed by scornful laughter and judgmental stares. Without another word, Vanessa turned her back on Eduardo and walked over to another wealthy guest, clinging to his arm as if nothing had happened. Eduardo watched the scene unfold in silence, feeling both pain and relief. This was exactly the confirmation he had expected, but one crucial piece of the night was still missing: Sofia's reaction. His heart raced as he waited for what would happen next. The entire room was now split between curiosity and shock. The show was only just beginning,
and Eduardo knew the most important part was yet to come.
Vanessa didn't waste any time putting on a show. The moment Eduardo announced he was bankrupt, she raised her voice so everyone could hear her. Her eyes flashed with anger and contempt, as if she were the victim of some big lie. "I knew it. Men like you never last," she exclaimed, drawing quiet applause from a few hypocrites in the crowd who were clearly enjoying the drama. Without bothering to hide her hurry, she rushed over to a middle-aged businessman who'd been watching from a distance. She grabbed his arm with the same intensity she'd once reserved for Eduardo. The move was cold and calculated, but effective. Everyone got the message. Vanessa wasn't interested in love. She was after status and power. Eduardo stood motionless, watching her as if every second were another silent stab to the heart. Deep down, he'd known this would happen, but seeing it play out hurt more than he'd imagined. The muffled laughter of the guests only made him feel more alone. It was as if the whole ballroom had turned into a courtroom, judging him for a bankruptcy that wasn't even real. As Vanessa began exchanging cheek kisses with her new prospect, Eduardo couldn't help but reflect on how blind he'd been all this time. She never loved him. She only loved what he could give her. The credit card, the jewelry, the expensive dinners, it was all part of some unspoken contract built on self-interest. And now, faced with his so-called ruin, she was finally showing her true colors. A few guests came over to comment on Eduardo's downfall, disguising fake sympathy with poisonous smiles. "Oh, so sorry, my friend. You know how it goes. The market can be brutal," said one of them, already stepping back to avoid being associated with failure. Others simply kept their distance, as if poverty were contagious. Vanessa, laughing loudly with her new companion, shot Eduardo one last look of pure disdain. "Good luck, darling. You're going to need it," she said, before disappearing through the main exit. The click of her heels echoed through the room like a final dramatic exit. Everyone had witnessed the betrayal.
Eduardo took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Even though he had expected this moment, the pain was unavoidable. Being abandoned like that was more than just confirmation. It felt like an open wound. But he knew there was still a second part to his test. And that's why he stood his ground. All eyes turned to Sofia, who remained silent. Everyone was waiting to see if she too would walk away. The room was filled with anticipation, as if the next move would decide everything. Eduardo's heart raced as he watched her, waiting for the final revelation. Deep down, he knew this moment would change everything. It would either confirm his hopes or shatter his faith in goodness forever. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Sofia's response. What had started as a night of glamour and luxury had turned into a stage for hard truths, and Eduardo was about to find out who would truly stand by him. Sofia remained seated for a few moments, unable to believe what she had just heard. Eduardo? Bankrupt? Her heart beat faster, and tears welled up in her eyes before she even realized it. They weren't tears of panic, but of compassion. She didn't see him as the billionaire who had lost everything. She saw a man who suddenly seemed vulnerable in front of everyone. She rose slowly and walked toward him. Every step echoed in the silent ballroom as people watched with curiosity and judgment. When she reached Eduardo, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "Even if you've lost everything, you still have me. I can help." Her words were met with disbelief. Some guests chuckled quietly, thinking it was absurd that a cleaning lady would offer to support a man who once had billions. But Sofia ignored their stares. Tears streaming down her face, she continued, "Even if you've lost everything, you still have me. I can help. I have some savings. It isn't much, but it's enough for us to start over. You're not alone." Eduardo felt his chest tighten. That simple offer meant more to him than all of Vanessa's diamonds.
It was the purest, most sincere gesture he had ever witnessed. For a moment, he forgot this was all part of a test. Sofia's love and kindness felt so real that it completely disarmed him. Around them, guests whispered, some confused, some quietly applauding, others criticizing Sofia for being naive. But to Eduardo, none of it mattered anymore. The light in her eyes was the answer he had been searching for, proof that genuine hearts still existed, even in a world full of superficiality. Gently, he took Sofia's hand and felt its strength. Emotions overwhelmed him, and he almost revealed the whole truth right then and there, but he held back, remembering there was still one final moment yet to come. He had to wait just a little longer.
Sofia, not fully grasping the impact of her actions, simply held his hand, offering him reassurance. "I believe in you, Eduardo. I always have. Money isn't everything. You'll get back on your feet. I know you will." Her words were like a soothing balm to a soul worn down by distrust. The room was split. Some guests mocked her, calling her a dreamer. Others stood quietly, seeming to reflect on what they had just witnessed. It was a stark contrast between superficiality and genuine loyalty. Eduardo took a deep breath, taking in every detail of the moment. He knew he would never be the same again. For the first time, someone saw beyond his wealth, beyond his billionaire persona, and that changed everything. Right then, he knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden much longer. Sofia deserved to know. And in front of everyone, the elite would learn that true richness wasn't about money, but about the heart. After Sofia's gesture, Eduardo felt his heart racing as if it wanted to leap out of his chest. The image of her, in tears and offering her life savings, was permanently etched in his mind. He looked at her intently, but he no longer saw just the humble cleaning lady. He saw a noble heart that the rest of the world had overlooked. That was worth more than any fortune. As he held her hand, guilt began eating him up inside. The plan that once seemed brilliant now felt cruel. Sofia had no idea she was being used as part of a manipulative game. Eduardo dreaded the moment he would have to tell her the truth, already imagining the disappointment in her eyes. The guests continued whispering. Some called Sofia naive, others admired her rare courage, but Eduardo heard none of it. His world had narrowed down to her, to the genuine light in her eyes that didn't ask for anything in return. For the first time, he was afraid of losing something truly precious. He knew the next step would be risky. Revealing the truth in front of everyone wouldn't just expose Vanessa, it would shock Sofia. Would she be able to forgive such an elaborate deception? Eduardo wasn't sure, but hiding the truth would be even worse. That night, after the ballroom had mostly emptied, Eduardo retreated to his library. He spent hours pacing back and forth, rehearsing what he would say in his mind. He didn't want it to sound like empty excuses. It had to come from the heart, a sincere plea for forgiveness. The silence in the house stood in stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He remembered the look on Vanessa's face when she heard about the bankruptcy, pure contempt. And then he remembered Sofia's tears as she offered him everything she had. That contrast weighed heavily on him, but it also gave him strength to face what came next. By morning, Eduardo had made up his mind. He couldn't delay any longer. The gala dinner would have its final act, and this time there would be no acting. He would stand before everyone and reveal every detail of his plan. Sofia deserved the truth, even if it cost him her trust.
In the mirror, he straightened his jacket and stared at his reflection. He no longer saw just the billionaire heir to a fortune. He saw a vulnerable man, about to risk everything for a shred of truth. He smiled sadly. knowing there was no turning back. As he walked back into the ballroom, his stomach dropped. The stage was set, the people were there, and Sofia stood calmly in the background. Eduardo knew this night wouldn't just change his life, it would change hers too. The time had come. The weight of the truth could no longer be carried in silence. The ballroom filled up again the following night after Eduardo had announced a second speech. The elite's curiosity outweighed any disdain they might have felt over his supposed bankruptcy. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and whispers, as though a secret hung in the air. Eduardo stepped onto the makeshift stage at the center of the room, took a deep breath, and looked out at the audience. His eyes found Sofia, sitting quietly in a corner, and in that moment, he found the strength to go on. His voice came out steady but filled with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, everything that happened yesterday was part of a test. I didn't lose anything. I wanted to find out who would really stand by me. The shock was instant. A wave of murmurs and exclamations of disbelief spread through the room. Vanessa, standing in the back with her new companion, widened her eyes, her face flushed with anger. Sofia, on the other hand, brought her hand to her chest, unable to believe what she was hearing. Eduardo continued without hesitation. I gave unlimited credit cards to 2 people. One used it to feed her vanity. The other used it to save lives. While some laughed, one person offered me her own life savings to help me start over. It's that person who has my deepest respect. All eyes turned to Sofia, who stood trembling in silence. Whispers spread across the room, some mocking her naivety, others acknowledging her strength. Eduardo then walked over to her and knelt down in front of everyone. His eyes were glistening, but his voice was clear. Sofia, I owe you an apology. I used your kindness in an unfair test, but I want you to know you changed my life. A deep silence fell over the room. Furious, Vanessa stormed out, stomping her feet, unable to bear the humiliation. The guests who had once mocked the scene now watched with uncomfortable expressions. Eduardo wasn't just exposing Vanessa, he was exposing the entire shallow nature of the elite. Tears welled in Sofia's eyes as she hesitated before responding. You used me, she said softly, her voice trembling. Eduardo held her hand, looking at her with sincerity. Yes, and I'm deeply sorry, but I couldn't let the world overlook your strength.
The whole room held its breath. Everyone was waiting for her response, as if her decision would be the final judgment. Sofia closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and said, If you've truly learned something, then use your wealth for something meaningful. Eduardo smiled, deeply moved. There, in front of everyone, he knew he had found not only the truth he was searching for, but also a new reason to live. What began as a cruel test had turned into a revelation, and the elite would never forget that night. The room was still silent as Eduardo stood up, discreetly wiping away a tear. Everyone expected him to make the classic move, to kneel again and ask Sofia to marry him. But he surprised them all by taking out an elegant envelope and handing it to her. I don't want to tie you to me out of guilt or pressure. I want something greater. I want you to be my partner. The guests exchanged confused glances. Some whispered, expecting a sparkling ring. Instead, inside the envelope were official documents naming Sofia as the director of the new philanthropic foundation Eduardo was about to launch. The elite, used to applause for displays of wealth, didn't know how to react to such a reversal of values. Sofia, surprised, brought her hand to her mouth. Her eyes welled up again, this time with disbelief. Me?
"Director of a foundation?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eduardo smiled and nodded. "No one is better suited than you to lead something born from compassion and justice. I want to walk beside you, not above you." The gesture shocked everyone. Many couldn't believe a billionaire would share real power with someone they saw as ordinary. But Eduardo didn't care. To him, this wasn't just a title. It was proof that he saw Sofia as his equal, his confidant, and the heart of the change he wanted to bring to the world. Vanessa, who hadn't completely left the room yet, let out a sarcastic laugh when she heard the announcement. "A cleaning lady? A director? That's ridiculous!" she shouted, trying to humiliate Sofia in front of everyone. But Eduardo turned to her and replied firmly, "What's ridiculous is believing someone's worth comes from their clothes or jewelry. Sofia has something none of you have: honesty." The room trembled at his words. Some guests stood up in protest, but most remained silent, ashamed. It was as if for the first time they were seeing the emptiness of their own lives reflected back at them. Sofia, though timid, stood her ground, still struggling to believe the weight of the responsibility she'd been given. Eduardo held her hand again, looking into her eyes. "I don't want you to be my shadow. I want you to be my true partner, not just in this foundation, but in any path you choose." His words didn't carry the glitter of a romantic proposal, but they held something far deeper: genuine respect. Sofia took a deep breath, still hesitant. The fear of not being enough mixed with her desire to make a difference in the world. But deep down, she knew she couldn't refuse. Accepting meant not just changing her own life, but the lives of thousands of people and animals who would benefit from the foundation.
"I accept," she said, her eyes filled with tears and a shy smile on her face. The room filled with murmurs, but also with a few hesitant claps. Eduardo smiled, feeling an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. In that moment, in front of everyone, Eduardo and Sofia made a commitment, not to romance, but to purpose. And that purpose would be strong enough to change lives. Days later, the news spread throughout the city. Newspapers ran controversial headlines: "Billionaire appoints cleaning lady as director of new foundation." The elite reacted with disbelief, while ordinary people celebrated with excitement. Sofia became a symbol of hope, proving that true greatness comes from the heart, not from status. The foundation was launched in a simple yet emotional ceremony. Eduardo made sure there was no extravagance, no diamonds, no lavish banquets, just people who believed in change gathered in a welcoming space. Sofia spoke timidly, but her words moved everyone. "It doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is what you choose to do with what you've been given." The foundation's first projects focused on animal shelters, low-cost clinics, and educational programs in underserved communities. Sofia was hands-on with every initiative, diving into the work with passion and dedication. Eduardo, at her side, was amazed by the strength of this woman who had once quietly swept the halls of his mansion. Slowly, their bond grew stronger. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, but a solid partnership built on trust and respect. Eduardo learned to see the world through Sofia's eyes, discovering beauty in simple places he had once overlooked. She in turn discovered a strength in herself she never knew she had. Vanessa, on the other hand, disappeared from the social scene for a while, embarrassed by her public humiliation. Those who had once applauded her now avoided her, afraid of being associated with her selfish image. Her downfall was a perfect example of how fragile a life based only on appearances can be. The foundation grew quickly, attracting volunteers and partners who truly believed in social causes. The impact was visible. Families received support, animals were treated with dignity, and young people found opportunities. Sofia's name, once associated with simplicity, now echoed as a symbol of hope. Eduardo felt renewed. For the first time, his money seemed to have a real purpose. It wasn't about dinners or jewelry anymore. It was about transformation. He realized he had found more than an ally. He had found the true meaning of wealth. One quiet afternoon, as they walked together through the revitalized shelter, Eduardo said to Sofia, "If it weren't for you, I'd still be lost in empty parties. You showed me what really matters." She smiled, gently petting a happy little dog running nearby, and replied, "And you showed me that even the powerful can change if they choose the right path."
The bond between them went beyond any definition. They weren't just boss and employee, nor simply friends. They were two souls who found each other in the chaos and decided to build something greater than themselves. And so began a new chapter in their lives, not one of luxury, but of purpose. And this new beginning promised to be more lasting than any fortune. Time passed, and Eduardo and Sofia's foundation became a model for the entire country. What started as a simple act of compassion grew to transform thousands of lives. News stories highlighted rescued animals, supported children, and rebuilt families. Sofia's name was always remembered as a symbol of kindness and courage. Eduardo watched it all with quiet pride. He no longer saw himself as the lonely billionaire surrounded by people trying to flatter him, but as part of something bigger. With every visit to their projects, his heart filled with a different kind of joy, a genuine one. He had discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in the lives he helped change. Though naturally reserved, Sofia grew into her new responsibilities. She became a respected leader, always carrying the same humility she'd had from the start. She turned down luxuries, preferring to invest every penny of the foundation's funds into those who truly needed it. To her, being director wasn't about status, it was a mission. A deep connection grew between them. It was more than partnership, more than friendship. It was a bond that defied simple labels. Eduardo knew he could rely on her no matter what, and Sofia saw in him not the billionaire, but the man who had chosen to use his wealth for good. That trust was more precious than any diamond. The society that once mocked them began to reflect. Many business leaders followed Eduardo's example, launching similar initiatives. The elite, somewhat ashamed, began to realize that a reputation built on jewels and parties couldn't compare to real impact. The foundation's influence reached far beyond its walls, inspiring a wave of solidarity. Vanessa, now faded into the background of high society, became a cautionary tale of how greed can ruin a reputation. Meanwhile, Sofia earned growing respect, not for her wealth, but for her integrity. Eduardo, in quiet moments, felt grateful to have found her, even if it was through a plan that had once felt cruel. One afternoon, while visiting the shelter that had started it all, Eduardo walked among happily running dogs. He sat beside Sofia, who was gently petting a recently rescued puppy. Can you believe it? It all started here, with you choosing to help when you could have spent it all on yourself. Sofia smiled softly and replied, "And do you realize it wasn't the card that gave me power? It was the chance to do good?" They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, as if no more words were needed. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Eduardo felt a sense of peace he had never found at parties or in million-dollar deals.
For the first time, his soul felt light.
This story proves that real wealth lies in the heart, not in the bank account. If you believe that too, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us for more heartfelt stories that will touch your soul.